live on YouTube now. Welcome to Courageous Endeavors, a conversation about caring for others. I'm thankful that you're here with us today. Thank you, friends, for joining us. Some of you I see have been with us before, and thanks for coming back. Looks like you're finding value from talking with experts around the world about various issues that family members are facing as they are thinking about how to care for people that they love. Very excited to introduce our topic today and our speaker, who will be coming to us from Connecticut. Before I do that, a few notes, thank yous. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Benjamin Sermi. I'm social gerontologist and director of people and culture for Kelsch. There's my contact information. If you have any questions or want to talk to me about future topics that you're interested in seeing, please feel free to reach out to me. I want to thank the Kelsch communities, the family that sponsors these online events. This is Alison and Emmett Kelsch, who back in 1958 sold everything that they had in Longview, Washington, and bought an abandoned nursing home. And they began caring for elders in this nursing home back in 1958, when nursing homes were one of the most progressive ways to take care of seniors. As things changed, they began to realize that nursing homes were not the best place to take care of seniors. And so they took their ideas and they put together one of America's very first assisted living communities. It's the earliest one that I found in my research. Delaware Plaza in Longview, Washington. They created an apartment complex in which seniors could have their own privacy and their own lives, while at the same time getting the help that they needed with everyday life. Today, their son Aaron Kelsch and his wife Judy and their children own and operate 32 communities across the United States. And so we want to say thank you to the Kelsch communities for sponsoring these various events. Today, we are giving away the Caregivers Care Package. If you've come to our various events, you know that every time you come to one of these events, you can enter a drawing for the Caregivers Care Package, the first box in a series of subscriptions we're giving away, along with a caregiver journal. These were created by Elizabeth Leigh Bradley, a licensed family and marriage therapist who went through the journey herself of caring for her mother and realized that caregivers need tools, family members need tools in order to care for themselves as they're caring for someone that they care about. And surprisingly enough, today we have the privilege of having the designer of these two products, these two services, on our event today, and I'll introduce her in a moment. If you want to enter that drawing, as well as get any resources that Elizabeth Leigh might mention today in her talk, please go to livingwellevents.org/insights after this event. It should pop up automatically on your screen if you're using Zoom. If not, you will be seeing this again at the end of the presentation. It'll be back on screen. So without further ado, I want to introduce Elizabeth Leigh Bradley. She is a licensed family and marriage therapist who's been working with families and with people with all different challenges, working with them for years. And then she went through her own experience, as I said before, caring for her own mother, and realized that there's a whole suite of tools that have not been created to help family members cope with caring and care for themselves. And so, Elizabeth Leigh, I'd love to have you join us today. Thank you for joining us. Are you there?
Thank you. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Can you see me?
Not yet. You'll make sure your video is started. There we go. Wonderful. Wonderful to have you. And you're coming from Connecticut.
I am. Yes, thank you. And we're experiencing some rain right now with possible thunderstorms. So I'm hoping I stay online. Should be fine, right? But what can you do?
Well, I know you've been crazy busy with lots of family members contacting you right now through everydaycaregivers.com. Thank you for carving out some time to be with us today. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, well, thank you, Benjamin. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to all of you who are caregivers. Some of you may be family caregivers, professional caregivers, administrators of different progressive care sites. And so I just commend you and thank you for carving out your time to come and hear what I see as the next trend in, or not even trend, the need in caregiving industry, which is the mental health and wellness of caregivers. But I want to take you back just a little bit and share just a broad overview of my journey, which is probably going to be very familiar to you, particularly if you are a caregiver right now. But I want you to understand my journey to help you understand why I created the tools that I created to help caregivers everywhere. So let me start off by asking a couple of questions. And I realize the format we're in, it's not likely that I will hear or see your responses, and that's okay. But how many of us have experienced a range of emotions lately? Quite a few, I imagine.
Elizabeth,
How many of it? Yes.
let me interrupt you just real quick.
Okay.
There's something clicking a lot as you're speaking. It might be something like your cord might be clicking against your necklace or something.
Okay, let me take that off. Yes.
And then
I don't
if
want
anybody
that
does
to be
want to
disrupted.
respond to Elizabeth Lay as she's talking, there's two ways, there's three ways to do that. One is there's the chat feature. You can be typing in your responses and she will be able to see what you're saying. And then there is the Q&A box if you have a question, and she may be able to get to that later on in the presentation. And then there is also the ability to raise your hand. And if you do that, we may call on you at some point during the presentation. So anyway, I'll let you get back to that. Thank you.
Oh, no, I appreciate you stepping in to do that. Sometimes I forget that that can happen. Let me just feel like I'm getting clothes now, though. All right, so I just experienced a range of emotions. How many of you have also in the last month or so experienced a range of emotions? How many of us have been looking for some kind of relief or a sign that the uncertainty is coming to an end, right? We're all still seeking that validation of what we're going through right now is going to end at some point. We know it intellectually, but we're looking for some concrete sign. That's because we're all experiencing some form of trauma. And as I said before, those of you who are caregivers, you're familiar with that experience. That is not an unknown to you. But it's one thing to intellectually know about trauma, and it's something completely separate to experience it. And that's what caregivers, that's what I share to those who are not caregivers. That's what I take them through to help them understand that as caregivers, that's what we experience day in and day out. Some days are better than other days, but we're still experiencing trauma. Now, our bodies are really smart, and it has a capacity to develop tolerance levels. And for many of us who have been in the caregiving role for many years, right, some of our anthems include things like, I'm fine. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But our tolerance levels, our body develops these tolerance levels as a form of coping. Now, my story is like so many other family caregivers. My story started like many others. I never even identified as a caregiver. And because I didn't identify as a caregiver, it never allowed myself to truly understand the impact of caregiving. Even after 20 years of helping family members struggle with the trauma of mental health and substance abuse, I still didn't understand the true extent and the impact of caregiving. Even after 10 years of caring for various family members through mental health, substance abuse, and more recently, age-related conditions, I truly still, at that point, didn't understand the true impact of caregiving. One might think that after I went from being a very happy, as you can tell, I love smiling, engaged, physically fit person who was running indoor and outdoor triathlons to barely having the strength to smile. It felt like I was lifting 500 pounds just to put a smile on my face, to avoiding people because I didn't want to have a conversation, and to gaining significant weight where I put myself at the highest risk for developing chronic illnesses, including high blood pressure, heart disease, and diabetes. One would think at that point, I would truly get the impact of caregiving. Unfortunately, at that point, my body was still in survival mode. And so I started to internalize and shame myself. And I would say things like, well, you must not be as good of a therapist as you think you are, because otherwise you wouldn't have allowed yourself to get as depressed as you are. I would say things like, you must be so selfish to think about your needs when people around you are clearly suffering at a greater rate than you are. And my favorite, because I always came back to this, that was kind of the default. No one wants to hear you complain. No one wants to hear about your struggles. So put your big girl pants on, right? And just deal with it. Just get your stuff together. How many of you have ever said or experienced some of those thoughts? I'm imagining many of you are or have. No, for me, that still was my body being in survival mode and my brain trying to help me figure things out, even though it wasn't healthy, right? It was my brain's way of working through things. Now, for me, when I started to understand the true impact of caregiving on me, came down to one day. One day when I was out on my front porch and I was flipping through my journal that I had been keeping. And for whatever reason, on that one day, my brain actually started to process the words on page after page after page. They were words and phrases like, I just want this to end, or I matter to no one. I'm invisible. Anybody ever felt invisible while you were caregiving? I'm not sure how much longer I can do this. I can't do this. And then on the last entry, I said, I want to die. And as emotional as that was, and obviously still is, right? I'm so grateful that I kept a journal during my caregiving experience, because it allowed me for my brain to catch up to what my body was subconsciously telling me. And it was the slap in the face really that I needed, because when I read those things, I said out loud, this is not me. I need some support. I need some help. And that was the moment everything changed for me. And I called my husband and I said, I need you to come home. And he immediately came home. And when he came home, through tears, bless his heart, through tears, I was trying to communicate to him what was going on. And of course, that was upsetting for him. And so through him understanding who I was and what I was trying to say, he just hugged me. He hugged me tighter than I think he's ever hugged me before. And he said, it's going to be okay. Right. And I was like, I don't know if it's going to be okay. My body is just wearing down. I don't know how I can get through this. But I knew, having said that out loud and having that conversation with my husband, my therapist hat came on, my true therapist hat came on, and I knew instinctually what to do. Look up support, look up help. And so I just did a simple Google search, and I said, but again, I didn't even identify necessarily at the time as a family caregiver. So I just said, I think my Google search was something like support for those caring for chronically ill individuals. And everything that came up was really great information about what needed to be in place for the care recipient. Really beyond the blog directive of make sure and ask for help, or make sure and take time for yourself, or the traditional brick and mortar, which I've been a member of for 20 years. I wasn't able to come across any actual tangible support that could meet me where I was, because when I was caring for my mom, I was living with her, and she needed 24/7 care, and I couldn't leave my house. So I couldn't go to the brick and mortar. Plus, I'm in Connecticut. My mom is in Oklahoma. And so I wasn't sure if my insurance would even handle, be able to cover something like that. What was I going to do with my mom while I went to the appointment? I was asking for help from my immediate family. And as many of you, I imagine, have experienced, you were met with a barrage of, well, it's not really a good time to take off work, or, family dynamics got in the way, and personalities didn't fit. And so they're really, even though I was doing everything that the blogs were telling me to do, it wasn't something that was helpful. And then my activist hat came on, and I said, this is just not acceptable. I'm just not comfortable letting this be the stop sign. Do not enter. You can't go any further. And through the support of my husband, who really encouraged me to move forward with this, I just started to get to work, and I started going back to my roots of positive psychology and the science of wellness. And I really started to dissect, what is it that I can create that would be really helpful to help individuals understand and create a system that allows them to put their own needs at the same level, not higher and certainly not lower, but at the same level as the needs of the care recipient. And so I spent about a year and a half talking to caregivers across the country and internationally. I started absorbing and learning from the best of the best, including Dr. Santos, who really digests the science of wellness. She's at Harvard. And then the father of positive psychology himself, Martin Seligman, started studying under them and really getting deeper into techniques and strategies and science-based methods that would help caregivers trick their brain, almost in a way, into developing these systems that allowed them to have healthier conversations with them, but also gave them motivation and inspiration and tactics, concrete physical tactics, to live with their current circumstances and do the things that they wanted to do, and be there for the ones that they love in a way that they want to, but not at the sacrament of themselves. And so I was really energized about this. And I thought, okay, I know this is great for me, right? Like I'm feeling the benefits of this, but is there a broader market out there? Or was I just a really bad caregiver and not doing it correctly, right? And so then I started to research into the statistics. And I don't know if anybody is aware of the health statistics associated with caregiving, but they're pretty dismal. And I don't share that as a downer. I share that for two reasons. One is, when I saw these statistics, the overwhelming wave of relief that came over me, that solidified, I'm not doing this wrong. I didn't do caregiving wrong. I'm not alone in these. But it also said to me, how can these numbers exist and we don't yet have programs or tools or resources for people to help them with their overall wellness? So just to share a couple of them with you, and these are all statistics done by AARP, or the National Association of Caregivers. And so they're very reputable studies. And what they showed us is that between 40 and 70% of caregivers report having symptoms consistent with depression. And between a quarter and a half of that population will develop symptoms consistent with the clinical diagnosis of major depression. Another statistic that you might find rather alarming is that caregivers have a significant risk of developing chronic health disorders that I put myself at risk for, including heart disease, cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure. And so again, I looked at it and said, how do these numbers exist? And yet we don't have programming or tools or resources that allow caregivers to live a more healthy lifestyle, because that's essentially what it is. For those of you who are in long-term situations caring for someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia, who don't have an extended family base where you can spread the support to, right? How do we create that? And that's what I wanted to be a part of. I wanted to be a part of creating the solutions to those questions. How do you do this? And so, as Benjamin mentioned, I created the very first Caregivers Wellness Planner. That is a planner / journal / workbook, if you will. And it encompasses all of those things that I was talking about: the positive psychology, the science of wellness, the effective coping strategies, the healthy coping strategies that can just on a daily basis serve as triggers to help you stay on track with what your needs are and how can you satisfy those needs. Now, it's very broad-based. It's not a how to do X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C, right? It's really a workbook, if you will. The first part of it is a workbook that looks at 4 different areas that I have found time after time, research has showed us, are the areas that are in most need of adjusting for being a caregiver. And the first one is what I call the functional needs. Our functional needs includes things like sleep. Oh my goodness, right? Yes, sleep. How many of you would love to just get even like 6 hours of sleep, uninterrupted sleep? Our functional need to eat well, to have good nutrition, to have social support, to have physical health, time to attend to your own physical needs. So we take a look at your functional needs, and what we've done is that we've created, or I've created, I tend to speak in the plural because I like to think of us as a team. But I've broken down in very simple ways, written prompts that help you figure out how can you create these things, no matter what your situation is. No matter if you are childless, no matter if you live far away from a solid support base, no matter what your circumstances are, we apply very strategic, science-based, research-informed ways to help you build those over time. I wish I could tell you that I've created something that if you just do this, all of your worries will be taken care of. But what I have created is a system that allows you to see progress, small incremental progress that is going to last for the duration of your caregiving, that is built on things that is of your specific situation. So your functional needs, again, to sleep, eat, have social support, and your physical needs. And then a second category is, how do you build that support system? When I looked at my particular situation and I said, There are some people who rise up and answer the call to care without a problem. And then there are others who are just not as comfortable with that. And really, I had a hard time with my family. Here I am, a family therapist. And on my drive back to Connecticut, I found myself saying, I don't know if I want to be a member of my family anymore. Like, I just really kind of felt abandoned. And again, when I was able to be more clear-minded, I said to myself, that's not who I am as a person, right? That's not, I'm a family therapist because I believe in family. But at the same time, I didn't want to just dismiss how that came about. And so I really took a look at what, again, trying to answer the how do you build a support system that doesn't include your immediate family? And so I've created a blueprint, if you will, a system that helps you look at other sources of support. And what I personally had to do, right, and we show you how to go about this in the planner, is how do you forgive people for not being at the same readiness state of caregiving as you are? How do you include them? And in that moment, I thought, oh, well, this sibling is really good at finances. I bet they would be much more comfortable handling the finances. Or this sibling is really good at talking to people, right? So maybe I can give them a role in this way. And here's the biggest thing that I had to say to myself, and I had to figure out if I was comfortable enough. How do I ask for help from people outside of the immediate family? Because I fell into that line where it was, this is our responsibility. Like, no one else should be taking care of my mom. Like, it should be us. And then I thought, you know what? My mom's best friend is two houses down. It didn't even dawn on me for whatever reason. But if I had called her and said, I need some sleep, right? Can you come and help mom? That could have, I didn't explore that option. So I don't know if it was a viable option. So we create a foundation and a blueprint, if you will, on how do you create a support system? What are the different ways? Who are the different people? Who are the different community supports that you can reach out to? How do you just start that conversation? And then how do you form a team around that that's really going to be helpful? Right. And I really believe that it matches what your need is with what people's strengths are, right? Your strength is being a caring and compassionate person. That's what makes you such a great caregiver, because the need, right, of someone being taken care of is what your strength is. So if we can apply that same strategy to what your need is with what other people are good at, then it's going to be much more of an opportunity for support than asking for something. If I had asked one of my siblings to help my mom with her hygiene, it would have made them uncomfortable, and it would have made my mom uncomfortable. Because I have 3 brothers, right? And so it would have been a mismatch all around. So that's the second category. The third category is we provide a blueprint of how do you break down barriers. If there's one thing we caregivers know, is that there are unexpected barriers that pop up all the time, right? And so we wanted to provide you with a system of how do you break down barriers. It's overwhelming. We're met with endless tasks. And so having a system that can just visually cue your brain to say, okay, we're going to work through this methodically, right? And we're going to follow this path that can help us derive at not one, but a couple of different solutions. And you've already created the steps that you need to do next, right? Because that's where sometimes we get stuck. What are the steps that I need to take in order to meet this need? And then the last step is really, how do you figure out how to create balanced care priorities, right? What are those things that give you purpose? What are those things that give you joy, that put a smile on your face? And how do we slowly and in a modified way figure out how to bring them into your life, right? For me, prior to my caregiving journey started, I was doing triathlons, and I was training Oh my goodness, probably 2, 3 hours a day. And when my caregiving ramped up, that stopped because I didn't have the opportunity to do that. And so my brain just kind of went in this all or nothing mode. Well, I can't do it the way I used to be doing, so I can't do it at all. And that's just the space, that's kind of the space where our brain gets to. And so what this section does is it really helps you understand that there are maybe some modifications that need to take place. And so how do you make those modifications that still allow you to do those things? Maybe not in the way that you used to be doing, but you're still in the game, if you will. And so if you enjoy gardening, right, and you could spend hours out there gardening, and that's something that really fills your soul, but for whatever reason, you're not able to do that, right? That could really be a downer. That could really bring us down, not being able to do things that feed our soul and feed our spirits. And so that last section is really looking at how do we do that based on time increments. And so throughout the rest of the planner, it's just providing you with different triggers and journal entries and coloring book illustrations, right? How do we trigger you on a daily basis in very small, non-overwhelming ways? How can we trigger your brain to remember that you are doing things for yourself, that this is a challenging time for you? And so how can we bring that toxic level of stress down to the point where you can still be who you are? And then the second product that Benjamin, excuse me, that Benjamin was mentioning, the Caregivers Care Package. Once I started putting out the planner out there and I started getting really great feedback from some caregivers, they wanted something that took them that extra step of how. Right. And so we created the Caregivers Care Package, which is a monthly subscription box. But I didn't want to just create stuff, right? That's the last thing that we caregivers need in our house. We don't need just a bunch of stuff. But who doesn't like getting things in the mail? And so everything throughout my entire career has always been about purpose. And so I wanted our box to be very purposeful. And so I paired up with a registered dietitian and I said, okay, our box is going to include self-care and nutrition. And so what people get is they get both. They get very tangible physical products that will help them implement the balanced care needs or the self-care needs that will help them work through different issues. And they will also get physical products that help them implement some kind of nutritional aspect that maybe they hadn't thought about before or were too intimidated to utilize. But you also get tangible things like a video from both myself and Hannah Koshak, who is the registered dietitian that I paired with. She's CEO of a company called Wholesome Endeavors. And she and I walk you through not only what's in your pack, but how can you use that during the next 30 days to build up a new habit, a new self-care habit, and a new nutritional habit. And why? Why is this going to be important to you? How is this going to help you reach a more emotional and physical equilibrium within yourself? And so those are the two things that I'm so super proud of and feel like is really missing in our industry. I'm taking it a step further and releasing probably this summer another step towards support in how do you come up with these things. And I'm going to be offering some services that you can do at your own pace, or if at a different level, if you want to work with me specifically, you and I roll up our sleeves as only caregivers know how to do. And we look specifically at your situation and figure out how to make that happen. So Benjamin, how am I doing on time?
Doing great, doing great. Do we still have some time now that we have you with us for answering maybe a few questions?
Okay.
Who are here, maybe about their specific situations. And
yeah.
I had one of our participants email me, and she asked this question. She said, I don't know if she wants me to mention her name or not, so I won't mention her name, but she says, sorry, let me go here. She says, how do you keep from getting depressed when the care recipient is negative and depressed? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's really hard, right? And so one of the things, without kind of going too deep into it, one of the things that I will share is that it's really important for you to practice and develop some boundaries, right? And the reason why it can be a little bit tricky and why, we could get lost into the finer details is something I would love to dive in deep personally with someone. Is the boundaries aren't just normal boundaries. Nothing's normal, unfortunately, in caregiving, right? But the boundaries have to take into consideration what the care recipient's specific capabilities are, right? Because if someone has late stage Alzheimer's or dementia, they might not be in control of their cognitive functioning and what comes out. So how do you do that? That's a great question. In your mind, identify, here, I'm going to say two things. One is, in your mind, identify what your boundary is, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, right? And the second thing that I would share is, when you need to take time, take your time, but don't take your time in an empty space. Surround yourself with something that feeds your soul, whether it's music, whether it's journaling. I'm a big advocate of journaling, as you clearly saw in my story, the positive role that it did play for me. Write it in your journal, read a book, look up some quotes, have a conversation with someone who is just overly positive, right? Reach out, talk to someone. You fill that space with something that is going to fill your soul. I see this a lot when it comes to mental health, right? A lot of times when someone is dealing with mental health issues, they're not very kind to those who are caring for them, loving them, and helping them satisfy their needs of what they're in need of. And so it can be really tricky to help keep that healthy mind unless we develop a practice and we surround ourselves with things and people that are going to feed that positive mental capacity.
That's powerful. I love how you're saying to take the space itself.
Yeah.
The space you're taking that moment feeds your soul.
But don't go into an empty space, because then your mind is going to be surrounded by the words that they're using to you. And that's what our brain is just going to focus on, right? So we have to replace it with something that is positive, even if you don't feel like it, even if it's work to get something out. Don't go into a void. Fill that space with something that feeds your soul.
We have another email that came in from a woman, and she asks, how could we convince a person to have balance? And she has given up her life totally devoted to caring for her parents. There are feelings of guilt, fear, and anxiety. And she is away from her parents. How do we convince a person that she does need balance? We care for someone who's in the situation. We're not in the situation. We care for someone who is, and they're not ready to accept help yet. What do we do?
Yeah, that is so hard to watch someone who is completely losing themselves, right? And is having a hard time dealing with those emotions of guilt and fear and everything that comes up if we don't do something, right? It's something I personally have had to deal with being in Connecticut. That's where my husband and I live, and my parents in Oklahoma. And for me, I had to get to this space of saying, you know what? I don't have to do it all. But when I was doing it all, it was very hard for me to hear from other people anything different than to do something different than what I was already doing. So I actually wrote a pretty extensive blog post on this after I, again, had some distance and really kind of broke it down and looked at it using my rational brain. And here's the thing. Sometimes people have a really hard time accepting help. Sometimes people have a really hard time asking for help. And I'm reading this correctly, and that this is someone who is concerned about another caregiver, right? So here's the thing, don't leave them. Accept where they are in the journey, change some of your language, right? Because our language that we use reflects our emotions ourselves, right? And so if we go, oh my gosh, you should just do this, or, you don't have to do everything, that comes out and it pushes them further. Their brain actually processes that information. And it's kind of like we turn back into our adolescent brain, that defiant adolescent brain. No, right? I can do this and I'm fine. It's okay. But keep gently getting in their world, right? Stop by and say hello, offer your time. That is one of the biggest things, even if it's not doing something that allows them to go sleep or take a break, if they're just not comfortable leaving a parent, right? Just go over and have a conversation with them. If you keep putting yourself in their world, and if you keep gently asking, you keep what to do or offering things that you can do. I tell people, tell caregivers 3 things that you're good at, that no matter when they call on you to do those things, you could do them at a drop of a hat, because that's the caregiver's world, right? Sometimes they don't have months to plan about something. Sometimes they need you at a moment's notice. And so think of those 3 things that are within your wheelhouse that you would love to do for them and could do at a moment's notice, and keep reminding them. Eventually they will get to a place that they will be more open to asking, receiving help, and they will only feel more comfortable if they still feel like you're willing to give that. But the hardest things we as spectators have to go through is accepting people where they are as a caregiver, and as comfortable as they are in asking for and receiving help. Just keep at it, not at your own detriment, but keep putting yourself in their world, in their space, reminding them what you're good at, what you're wanting to do and willing to do. And when they're ready, when you take away that, what's the best way to diffuse an argument is agree with someone. You just simply shut it down, right? And their brain processes that information differently when it's not a combating conversation.
That's good. One other question. I mean, we have, there's a few other people on the call who may have a question, but one person emailed me and she said to ask you, how do elderly couples without children or family members, how do those folks who don't have children or family members, how do they cope when their husband or wife, their partner gets dementia and they're that solo caregiver? I know that's a big topic. We could do a whole entire event just on that topic, but what are a few things that you think might help that person?
Yeah, so it really depends on your comfort level in talking to people. And by simply asking that question, that tells me that you're at a point where you feel that's really going to be helpful to you, is by talking about this. So that's the first thing, which is great. You're already there. The second thing is, depending on your situation, because sometimes caregivers are able to leave and go to a physical support group, and sometimes caregivers aren't. And if you're in that situation where you aren't able to physically leave, there are some really great support groups online. I know that's going to be part of what my service offering is going to be. We will have a private online space where caregivers can come together and share with one another. The other thing that I would tell people is to reach out to any community supports. If you have a religious affiliation, to reach out to that group. If you belonged to some community organization, then try to reach out to them. The Alzheimer's Association is amazing, and they have a lot of resources there. If you don't know where to start in your community, then the Area Agency on Aging sometimes can be a really great place to start, just to get some different ideas of what is within your community. But I would say to seek out those communities that can support you either physically within your community or online. And sometimes the online community can be a great place to start. I know that's where I started in my journey. And as an introvert, I know, shock and surprise, I'm an introvert. You know, I just kind of listened and observed online before I kind of jumped in and kind of shared everything that was going on with me. So sometimes that online is a great place to start because you don't necessarily have to be speaking about what it is that you're going through. But I would encourage you to think beyond, just as I had to. And again, you're going to have to assess your comfort level with that, but think beyond your immediate family. Are there friends? Are there community supports? Are there extended family members that you can reach out to?
That's really good advice. Anyone else on the call, you're welcome to either ask a question in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you and we'll just hear your voice. Your video won't come up. Is there anybody else with a question for our expert today, Elizabeth Lay? Anyone else? We have some amazing people on the call, by the way.
That's great.
I think Christina has had to drop off, but Christina is from the Vancouver area, and she actually started an organization that brings caregivers, family caregivers together all over her county to try to give them support. Any questions from anybody at all in our audience today?
The only other thing that I would, I appreciate you bringing up the Loving Them Forward community, because it triggered in my mind, Christina and I have developed a relationship just by happenstance, but that speaks to how impactful caregivers are in their community, because Christina was a caregiver herself and she went to a lot of those places that we've been talking about today. And so if there really aren't those resources, which unfortunately could be the case for any one particular person, as a caregiver, the moment you put out there anybody else caregiving and struggling with their caregiving journey, you're going to have people gravitate towards you. So even within your own, if you're online in like Facebook or things like that, if you just kind of put that call out there, you'd be amazed at how many people are saying, oh my gosh, yes, I'm struggling with this too. And you can almost create your own private group with people that you know and are familiar with.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Question. How do you respond to a person with Alzheimer's who doesn't want to accept outside help? How do you respond to a person with Alzheimer's who doesn't want to accept outside help? So that's an anonymous question. I'm assuming the question is coming from a family caregiver who is looking, okay, I want to take advantage of these resources. I want to get help. I need some sleep. Let me go get the neighbor to help out. Let me go get some respite care over there at the memory care. Let me do this. And the person, you are the only caregiver for me.
Right. Oh, thank you so much, whoever asked that question. Thank you so much for asking it. It's one of the questions I get asked a lot. And here's the thing. We have to do it anyway. Because if we don't, here's another alarming statistic. 30% of caregivers will die either before or within 5 years of caring for someone 24/7. And again, I don't share that to panic you. I share that as a realist. As a moment we have to come, as caregivers, we have to come to this moment that says, I understand this person is anxious about having someone they aren't familiar with. come and take care of them. That's a real reality. And I don't want to diminish that at all, but it's coming from a place of anxiousness. And so what I often tell caregivers is, let's use that breaking down barriers blueprint that is identified in the caregiver's planner. And how do we work with the anxiety? What are the steps we need to take to reduce that anxiety? But the other hard moment we as caregivers have to get to, right, is understanding that in order for us to be the kind of caregivers that we know our care recipients need, sometimes we have to make decisions that they're not going to be 100% on board with. But as long as it's not a decision that is going to cause, harm, neglect, or abuse, right? Those decisions are still really important to our health and well-being. And that's a hard place to get to, right? I wasn't dealing with a situation where I needed someone else to come in and take care of my mom. Well, it's not what happened. Clearly, I needed someone else to support me, but that's not something that entered my mind. And I'm very lucky that my mom was one of the best patients. If I said, Mom, someone's coming in to help us, she probably would have been on board. But it would have been heartbreaking for me to bring someone in and hear my mom really get emotional about this, cry, yell, scream, say nasty things to me. It's going to be hard, but you need to do this as a form of self-preservation. And here's the other thing, just like as we would on developing steps on how to deal with the care recipient anxiety, we also need to work through the steps of what you're going to need for support. So in that example that I just laid out about myself, it would have been important for me to walk away to get some respite and go not somewhere by myself, which is what I would have been tempted to do, but go to someone's house that I could say, listen, I'm going to have a tendency to, if my mom calls, I'm going to want to run right back, right? Or if it's too upset, I'm not going to make it to your house. So I need you to come pick me up. And while I'm at your house, I need you to reassure me that this is the right decision that I made. So just as much as we need to put things in place for the care recipient, we also need to put things in place for ourselves that are going to help us be better at making those decisions, those very difficult and emotional decisions, but decisions that are important nonetheless.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
As a gerontologist, I think a lot about the person with dementia, right? Which is why I'm so glad to have you on the calls, because you're thinking so much about the caregiver. And a lot of my work and research has been on how to work with the person with dementia. And so on the other side of the coin, I'm thinking already about strategies to help that person with dementia be less anxious, such as introducing the person who's coming from the outside less as immediately into personal care, let's say, but instead into some sort of purposeful, meaningful activity, such as there's a project that must be done for our church, and I have someone coming over to help us with that project. Or this person is coming to help us sort our garage, and we're going to be looking through all the books in the garage and figure out what to give away and what to keep, or where there's some sort of purpose in this person's first few visits that begins to slowly open up the door for relationship. Or perhaps, another way to do it is to look at getting the person with Alzheimer's actually outside of the house, where they're going to a day stay center at a memory care community or at a day center, where they're going somewhere, or they're going with a home care aide to a coffee shop when those open again. And so sometimes just getting out of the house, the manners kick in and start to behave in a different way, even with dementia. Anyway, those are just two of many strategies, but I like what you're saying about going to a friend's house so you're not tempted to come right back.
Yeah. And letting that person know, if you need that additional support, I need you to continuously tell me that this decision was a good decision, right? And I need you to almost hold my hand through that panic and through that stress and through that emotion. And as you were talking, Benjamin, I found myself saying, even if it's bringing someone in that says, not for you, but for me, right? That I'm going to help this person with this project. Sometimes with Alzheimer's, dementia, that routine and that familiarity, as you were speaking to, is so important. And so the longer that they have exposure to that person, then it becomes part of their world. But yeah, looking at what are those steps to reduce that anxiety, because that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a place of anxiety. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you spending time with all of the work you're doing around the country to be with us today.
Oh, sure. Oh, my pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and I appreciate have the opportunity to speak to your community.
I'm going to put back on the screen for you the link to the online tool that you can go to if you'd like to enter to win the Caregivers Care Package. Now you can also, I will have the link. The link will come to you if you go to this to be able to go ahead and purchase the whole subscription, because it can be really helpful, or the Caregiver Journal. So either way, if you go to this website right here, livingwellevents.org/insights, many of you will just pop up on your screen when you're done. Two things: you'll be entered into the drawing. You'll also receive in about 24 hours a couple links from Elizabeth Lay, including links to more information about the resources that she's put together. So thank you to everyone who has been on the call today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Next week, we do have a couple very interesting presentations. One will be Maria Cura-Castro, who is speaking on the power of giving. She is an expert in integrating giving into our everyday life and also into our business life. If you happen to be a professional, she has woven giving and philanthropy into her everyday work. So that's a very interesting conversation. And then on Wednesday, we have one of the world's experts on dementia care speaking about what they're doing in Europe and Japan to work with the most frail and the most challenging people living with dementia, as well as people with just regular frailty that comes about from being 80 or 90 years old in, let's say, a nursing home setting, doing some incredible work, seeing percentages drop like crazy in using pharmaceutical drugs to stop behavioral challenges and things like that. Some amazing work that they're doing. And then on Thursday, we have kind of a fun presentation with an art expert who's talking about 3 types of art that have purpose to do at home with someone you care about, or to do yourself, just to have fun and find some meaning and purpose right now when you're stuck at home. So we hope that you'll join us for those, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you again, Elizabeth Lay. Any last words for our guests?
Hey, you are not alone, and what you're doing is so important. I know it can be overwhelming, but what you're doing is so important. It's not more important to take care of yourself.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Elizabeth Lay. You have a wonderful week. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.